Hey everyone, it's Pastor Curt here, and I'm joined by
Pastor Mark. Good to
right.
see y'all. We are doing Q&A today, which is, we've been going through Romans. You wrote in a bunch of questions, and we're going to do our best to answer the questions you've sent in.
Yes, Q&A all the way up to chapter 8, and
Yes.
you got the first question for me, Mark?
Okay, yes, I do. So let's just jump right in. Thank
Right
you
here.
so much for asking the questions. Make sure that you keep asking them, because these are really great, and these are profound questions, and they're questions that kind of get stirred out of like, man, if what you guys said on the weekend was true, and what you guys said in the Bible study was true, what about this? And so these kind of things got risen. So we're jumping in, starting in questions that came out of Romans chapter 3. So, does God value Jews more than other people?
Great question.
That's the first question, right out of the gate here.
Yes. So the question is obviously no, God doesn't value Jews more than other people. Then, if that's true, why does he say these are my favorites? Why does he pick the Jewish people, not the Babylonians or the Assyrians? Why does God do that? Well, it has to do with two factors. One is God is a promise-making and promise-keeping God. So one of the ways to understand the Old Testament, and one of the ways to actually get your grasp of the 50,000-foot level of the Old Testament is to understand the covenants that God makes. And there's a lot of them in there. Some of them, like the Abrahamic covenant, are really, really super major. So why God has the favorites as the Jewish people is because he made a promise to an individual that he picked named Abraham that his descendants would be his people. So God makes the promise, completes the promise. And we learn all sorts of things about God's character by seeing what promises he makes, who he makes them to, and how he fulfills them. So number one reason is God is a promise-making God. Now, second reason, this is where it really gets interesting. God is not making that promise to Abraham because Abraham is so much better than you. He's making that promise to Abraham, listen to me, for you. In other words, God is revealing himself to Abraham through his promises in a way that you could also learn who God is.
Right.
It's a microcosm. So God's not going, I'm going to relate to every single person and every single tribe on the planet the exact same way. No, he's going, I'm focused here so that all the nations, and read your Old Testament. You know how many times God's saying all the nations? You know what place was put in the temple for all the nations? God is revealing himself to Abraham and his descendants, the nation of Israel, to reveal himself through that relationship to all nations.
That's good.
So it's a microcosm. We're to look at Abraham's life, or look at Noah's life, or look at David's life, and learn who God is through his promises to those people.
It's good. Yeah, and Paul gets to the point, as a Jew, he gets to Romans 9, he's like, man, I wish my Jewish kinsmen would actually believe in Christ. And then by the time he's in chapter 11, he has this beautiful thing where he talks about when a Jew comes to Jesus. He says this, when a Gentile comes to Jesus, it's ex nihilo, it's out of nothing. They're walking around, they're believing in the gods, and then they give their life to Christ. But because the Jewish story was what led to Christ, chapter 9, verse 1 to 5, he goes, when a Jew comes to Christ, it's like a little resurrection from the dead. It's like a little Easter. It's like there was something in them already that kind of went away. Now the Messiah came and they didn't believe, but now they've come back. They've given their life to Christ, and it's beautiful. It's something to celebrate. So in that way, there's a distinction almost. And like Paul always says, first to the Jew, but equally to the Gentile. I love that dichotomy, right?
Yes.
It's like he's constantly saying it. First to the Jew, and you're like, okay, Jews are more important, and equally to the Gentiles. Like, but I thought you, and it's like, yeah, because even chronologically, it's their story that led to the gospel. So
100%.
Yeah.
And they play a very important and incredible position in that anthology of salvation. Okay, here's my question to you.
Yes.
Romans chapter 3. So chapter 1, Paul starts setting us up. He says, wrath is being poured out, and all these horrible sins are happening, and all the religious people are going, amen, Paul, oh my gosh, it is so horrible. You're right. Then he flips it in chapter 2 and says, but you guys under the law, you're just as bad. And he comes to his conclusion in chapter 3, all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God.
Yes.
So, question comes in
after
we've been teaching that for many weeks. So you're telling me that everyone's bad and no one is good at all.
Now this was written in for Sally from Georgia wrote this in thing. So I think we should put a name in a city or a state on every question. So Sally from Georgia, you didn't say the city, but Georgia. Great. So Sally, so the question is, so you're telling me that everyone's bad and no one's good. Yes and no. So the doctrine of what's called total depravity isn't utter depravity. And what I mean by that distinction is depravity kind of reaches your whole person. It reaches your mind and your body and your sexuality and the way you deal with money and reaches every part of you. But it doesn't make you utterly depraved, meaning you have nothing good. You could be a non-Christian and build hospitals and do wonderful things because you retain what's called the imago Dei. You actually have the image of God. The Bible, oftentimes we're preaching and we start with Genesis 3. You're a sinner and need Jesus. It's like, well, the Bible actually starts with Genesis 1. You're made in the image of God and you're a sinner, yes, and you need Jesus, yes. So you have the image of God. Every single person is made in the image of God, and that's what gives them value at a level of essence. And so in that sense, no, not everyone's bad, but everyone's bad in the sense that Paul is talking about by the time he gets to Romans 3, which is we can't earn salvation. We are equally, there's this old phrase that says the ground at the foot of the cross is equal. It's flat. It's like all Jews, all Gentiles, every person has to come to the cross just like, man, there's nothing good in me in the sense of anything that could earn me salvation. And so I need God to make me good in that sense. But does it mean you can't help old ladies across the road? No, it just means that's not salvific. And that's Paul's main point he's trying to figure out in Romans. How do we get saved?
Yes.
And so he's saying we're not good enough to be saved. That's the point.
Yeah. We've been contaminated. We have not been completely corrupted.
Yes.
So it's touched every part. That's very good. I like it.
And even the thing about humankind is even the good things that we do tend to come back to us, maybe even as narcissistic or selfish. When we do help people, Dawkins talked about this as human beings, if we were just pure animal, even the selfless things we do are born out of a selfish gene. You talked about this a couple weeks ago in your sermon. We have a selfish gene. Why are we helping that old lady? Well, because maybe in our past we did it so that our tribe could survive and we'd be healthier and happier if we had more people like us. All of these kind of deconstructions of maybe even the good we do is just for our own benefit. Yes. So God's saying, look, I know you're good people. You do a bunch of good things. You're not all murderers, but you can't actually earn your salvation.
But there is an interesting counter-theistic argument, which is when someone acts absolutely altruistic in a way that risks them and their tribe.
Yes.
Why
what
do
is
we
that?
do
Yeah,
that?
why would you die for your enemy? There's guys who, or you're
100%,
crazy.
100%. Why do the people that risk their lives against the Nazis for people they didn't know, and they risk their children, and that's the Imago Dei. By the way, you're rocking the Latin on this episode.
Thank you. Okay, bud, here we go.
For me?
Chapter 5. Paul talks about suffering quite a bit.
Yes.
What's the reason for? I mean, this is obviously the ultimate question of questions, Curt. So if you haven't had your coffee, what's the reason for suffering? What's the cause of suffering? So in chapter 5, verse 3, I think this person's drawing from.
Yes.
It says, more than that, we rejoice in our sufferings, knowing that suffering produces endurance, and endurance produces character, and character produces hope. So they're honing. What's the reason for suffering? What's the cause of suffering?
So in the context of the verse, what's the reason for suffering? I'm not going to answer the big philosophical reason for suffering. I'll tell you what he means by the verse. The only way to get tough is to go through tough things.
Yes.
That's the meaning. So the research proves this out, by the way, that resilient people, the only way to produce resilience is to go through difficult things. So if you protect your children from pain, they will be unresilient. If you avoid or obfuscate or blame other people for your pain, instead of going through the pain, you will also be unresilient. So Paul says, I like hard things because they make me a better person. This is what he teaches on several occasions in the New Testament. Perseverance is produced by going through hard things. You want perseverance and resilience, you got to go through hard things. And the more hard things you go through, the more you don't panic and you actually see objectively and you can think clearly and you realize that there's going to be an end. It's not going to last forever. So that's what he means by that. The cause of suffering is the rebellion of man against God. So when we said, no, Lord, when we said, this looks better to me, and I will judge that I am a better judgment over this. So there's all sorts of great...
You're talking about in the garden.
I'm talking about in the garden. I'm talking about, so people want to debate in the garden. They want to debate about dinosaur saddles and all sorts of stupid stuff. Genesis 1-3 is the most brilliant piece of literature on the nature of humankind. So brilliant that it describes Our condition, literally generations and generations and generations after it was originated, it describes it, and it works in subcultures and other cultures at different times and ages. And so what's happening when Adam and Eve are going, we know what God said, and we're going to do this anyway, and then their response to that, and then God's response to that, what's the first thing God says? I can't believe you did this. No. Where are you? All of that is so deeply meaningful. It's so Freud before Freud with some extra holy sauce on it, that it really does describe what actually happened, which is our rebellion contaminated God's creation. So there's 4 types of brokenness in God's creation. There's environmental brokenness. We look at the plastic on the side of your road. Look at the litter everywhere. Now, we messed this place up. I'm not talking politics here. I'm just talking the truth. We put gum on the sidewalk. We pollute the ozone. Then there is a cultural or institutional brokenness. Some things are broken not on the individual. We always like to think of the person of it, but some things are sinful on a cultural or institutional level. Systemically, some cultures decide, hey, we should eat other people, or we should lie about this, and that lying is okay. Then there's personal, emotional, psychological brokenness. I am born with profound depression. I battle with a bipolar disorder. I have a connection problem. I don't know how to connect to people. Then finally, and most importantly, there's a spiritual brokenness. So we suffer environmentally, we suffer institutionally, culturally, we suffer psychologically, emotionally, personally, and we suffer spiritually because of our rebellion to God.
Yeah, it's good. Yep, I think that answers it.
Boom. I got one for you.
Okay.
So there's a lot of talk, and this is again from chapter 5, there's a lot of talk in Paul about enmity between us and God.
Okay, yeah.
What about this language? So the question is actually asked, and I'll say it's from Stan from Staten Island. Before I was saved...
Right. We forgot to give the last one.
Before I was saved, I was an enemy of God, question mark? How?
Right.
Most of us don't perceive ourselves as being at constant enmity with God.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I remember... I read something recently where a guy said, you walk up to a normal Joe on a normal day who doesn't know God, and you say, are you an enemy of God? And they go, no, I don't wake up in the morning like, oh, I hate God, I hate God, I hate God.
I rage against you, oh God.
I got a good life, I got a nice car, I got a good family. And then the disease comes, or he loses his family, or a tragedy happens. And what gets... Where he comes to in his life, oftentimes, not across the board, but oftentimes is, why did God, let this happen? I can't believe God allowed this to happen. I can't believe it. And the person said, what comes out during the squeeze is what's always been there the whole time in the heart. So it's not, I'm an enemy of God, I hate you every day of your life. It's a positional... you're not friends. You haven't been, he goes on to say 14 different times, he keeps using the word reconciliation in chapter 5. It's not actually 14, it's just a bunch. Probably 4 or 5. Reconciled. You've been reconciled to God, and that's the opposite of being an enemy. You're an enemy positionally, relationally, sometimes pragmatically and experientially, certainly spiritually, or you're an enemy. And that was the state you were in. And it was in that state, he says, we were enemies of God when Christ came and died for us. And that's what he's trying to say. We weren't like, oh man, I love God, he's the best. Oh, Jesus, now you... And God didn't come when we were friends and go, oh, I'm going to come and die for you on the cross because we're such good buddies. And that's part of his argument in 5. Curt, I might die for you because we're friends and I like you.
Right.
But man, if I hate, if there's enmity, if we're enemies, why would I die for you? How glorious is it, he says, that Christ came and died when we were enemies of God. And basically what he's saying is we're positionally and relationally, we're not reconciled to God yet. That's the answer to the question.
I would say also, we think about this as individual too much. So my enemy is the person at work that keeps sending emails to my boss saying I didn't do my job, and they're my enemy at work. They're my rival at work, and they're my enemy. When we kind of think we have enemies like that. Sure. I got that one cousin. I got that one brother. He doesn't like me, and we're enemies. And when Paul was writing this, enemies were different whole kingdoms.
Yes.
The Babylonians were the enemies of the Jews. Then the Persians took over, not as much enemies. They're like, you guys can go back to Jerusalem.
Yeah.
So it's what kingdom you're in.
Yeah, it's a collective.
It's not that you're waking up every day shaking your fist at God. It's like, you are in a different kingdom. My kingdom come, my will be done.
That's good.
So we're in different kingdoms, and then if you get reconciled, you can come over to my kingdom.
Right.
So which kingdom are you in is what Paul means.
That's really good. Okay, Joe from New York asks, out of chapter 6, does avoidance of sin mean avoiding situations with bad people? Great question, Joe.
Well, avoiding situations with bad people, according to the Apostle Paul, would be absolutely impossible because they're everywhere. So literally, we're going back to Corinthians now. He's like, and I do not mean avoiding non-Christians who are lost in their own behavior because they haven't encountered the grace of God yet.
Right.
Because you can't do that. You can't ever go to
You can't just disappear from the
But
earth.
if you're asking me if the main relationship support group you have is involved in destructive and sinful activities, that you will get involved in destructive and of course you will. We're very, very social. COVID has taught us this. And so you are going to, peer pressure. We always deny, peer pressure. No kid's going through any peer pressure. Peer pressure would be phenomenal. If I'm around all people that are just eating healthy all the time, I feel that peer pressure. So yes, we are deeply social. We're deeply impacted by the tribe we're in, by the subset of that tribe, by the family group that we're in, by the family group that we create if we don't have a family group. So the Bible is very clear. Create those family groups carefully. Now, here's the one little caveat I would add to this. We got to stop treating people that don't know Christ like there are rivals or enemies. And this is a lot what happened in American Christianity in the 80s.
Right.
We created a competition. I am a sinner. I am a sinner saved by grace. I still battle certain areas of sin in my life. I look at everyone from the perspective of my lost origin and redemption story. So I don't expect them to behave like I never behaved when I didn't know Christ. I give a lot of grace. I accept as I've been accepted. I forgive it. So, you can't, what I don't want you to do is go, oh, non-Christian, ick.
No.
You got to go, non-Christian, just like me. Just like I was.
Yeah, that's really good. So obviously you read Jesus, he's hanging out with the non-Christians. He's hanging out with the people who don't know him. He's hanging out. And so that's our call in life, obviously, to be salt and light to the world, and we gotta be missional in that life and actually doing life alongside of people who don't know Jesus. Clearly, getting to a place in your life where you're mature enough to handle some of those tempting scenarios is pretty crucial, so you don't fall back into it. But that's very individual. That's about knowing the person. I could walk into a situation right now and hang out with people doing drugs and love them and serve them. And not be tempted. My other buddy who came to, he'd fall. He'd fall right away. He'd get back into the drug scene. He'd be a mess. So it's all about understanding yourself, understanding what am I going to fall to temptation-wise, what am I not as I enter into these scenarios. And so I hang out with a lot of people. I used to smoke for years and years. They're smoking. I'm fine. I'm not tempted toward it, but I know I'm not going to start into it. So it's all about knowing yourself, exegeting yourself, knowing, okay, I can't go down that road as I'm going to try to impact the world. The other thing is we oftentimes avoid sin. And the way we do that is we think our job is to create a world without sin, almost like the culture war. And we enter into the culture war as if it's our job to create a world where people, but we got to understand that the world will, until the new creation, the world's going to have sin. We got to understand our position is not necessarily always to try to legislate sin out of the world, but to love and serve and reach people for Jesus who are then going to impact the culture, the media centers, the law centers, all that kind of stuff, because they know Jesus and they follow Jesus. And so it's going to be, the context of the whole Bible is us living in exile, living in cultures that don't know Jesus and trying to actually love and serve Jesus in those cultures when we don't necessarily have the power and the influence that we might want to go. We got to create a culture that doesn't have any sin. It's impossible. We got to go after individuals to see their hearts come to know Jesus.
Love it. Okay, here's my question for you.
Yes.
Why does, and this is from Bob in Albuquerque.
Yes.
Why
Thanks for
does
watching,
sin-
Bob. We love Albuquerque. You ever been to Albuquerque?
It's Robert
They shot
to you.
Breaking Bad in Albuquerque,
Yes, they
just
did.
like it.
And this is a great. This is a great
savvy
Breaking
right
Bad
there.
question from verse 23
Yes.
in chapter 6. Great
For
thematic
the wages
discussion
of sin is death, but
die-
the free gift of God is eternal life.
Yes,
Go ahead.
die to sin.
Okay.
The die to sin chapter. Why does sin have to have a punishment? So this, I was interesting. I was just on a tangent, got into reading some Universalists this week, some old school ones, like back when people went to that church.
Types. Okay.
I can't remember. They're like 1800s, 1700s Universalists.
Okay.
And they were more tied to the Bible than current Universalists, and they were kind of like of this camp. They're like, there's only one God. Forget this stupid Trinity thing. And Jesus was a great teacher. And that's enough, isn't it? All? Look at these Beatitudes. This is spectacular.
Right, that's the core, yes.
But we're not going to, there's no punishment.
Right.
And I'm like, how can you read the Bible and get that? And then more importantly, philosophically underneath that, is God punitive or is punishment serve a purpose that's essential?
Right. Well, I always like to say,
Punishment punitive.
I always like to talk about, I talk about this in my chapter on, I think it's hell, in the problem of God. Which you can get on Amazon right now. The problem of God, where I talk about the idea that like we sit around and drink lattes and go to university and come up with these things that we find offensive. And it's like, well, I find a God of punishment offensive, and so that's how I'm going to live my life. And the problem with that is take a plane and go to some jungle in Central America or somewhere and go to a group of people who've suffered rape and torture and ask them whether the thing that's going to hold them back is a God who will actually punish people perfectly for the injustices that never happened on this planet, and see if they lose any sleep over a God who's actually going to punish perfectly.
Yes.
But punish all the sins that never get worked out in this world. We have police. You and I live in a world, someone does something in 20 minutes, whatever, 10 minutes in Canada, half an hour.
Right.
You're going to have police helping out. Most places in the world, you don't have any justice. That's why mafias get built and gangs. And, we don't understand, why is it? Because no one is dealing with it properly.
Right.
Justice, opening scene of Godfather. I watch it, every few. What's that whole opening speech about? I went to the police, they raped my daughter, they didn't do anything, so I come to you, Godfather. I ask that you bring justice, right? The justice system didn't do what it was supposed to do, so now can you do justice for me, Godfather? That's what it's all built out of. Point being, we have this deep desire that justice would happen, and God is going to do it perfectly. And that's a beautiful thing. That's praiseworthy. We don't want people to get away with these terrible things that they do, and God is not going to let that happen. The pictures we get in the Bible about even heaven are the rewards are going to be exact to the person, and the punishment of people who don't go to heaven are going to be exact to their situation. Read John chapter 5, read Romans chapter 2, read Revelation 21:22. Over and over and over, we see this God of justice, and it is a good thing. And sin needs to, of course, have punishment.
Well, what you're saying is there is no, if I get you right, you're saying there is no such thing as justice without punishment.
Yeah.
That you can't just, we're doing right, but we're forgetting that.
Exactly. Great way of putting it. Yeah, we all want justice.
And people that live in unjust environments see it clearer because they're not as privileged as those of us. I think that's very smart.
Yeah.
I would add one thing to the punishment thing. I think we underestimate the destructive power of sin.
The what, sorry?
The destructive power of sin.
Destructive power of sin, okay.
Yes.
Yes.
So if we understood how much damage doing injustice does, we would appreciate the need for punitive response. But we don't. We think, I just lied a little. I just cheated a little. I just, that person, I'm sorry. I don't know. I didn't understand your situation, but I just ran right over the top of you.
Right.
And we don't see the ripple effect of it. If we could see the destruction, think Adam and Eve. It's a bite of a piece of fruit.
Right.
But the ripple effect of no God.
Yes.
I won't do that, God.
Right.
Is way deeper and more profound than we think.
Good point.
Okay. I said something here, so I should ask you a question. Okay. I added on to your answer.
Oh, okay. That's fine.
Okay. And I know what I'm going to ask you because you and I have talked about this. Okay. Chapter 7.
Oh, yes. Okay.
This is the chapter where the Apostle Paul goes, I want to do it, can't do it.
Right.
I should do it, didn't do it. Right. And there's two perspectives on this. Yep. One is Paul's writing from a pre-Christian point of view, He's saying this is what we're like when we're pre-Christians.
Yeah.
And the other point of view is, no, Paul is being super vulnerable and saying, we got to be tied to the Spirit here, because even I am susceptible to this ongoing habit of my sin nature. And he's confessing how hard it is, and he's being vulnerable. What is the right answer?
Well, here's the thing. First off, David from Montana, thanks for asking this.
I love the Montana questions.
Yeah, have we had multiple? Did we have?
No, they're always good.
They're always good. Yeah,
They're always good.
Yeah. Obviously, super detailed and a great. Actually, just on a real practical point, because it's probably more important than just the answer to this question. This has such a special place in my heart, and the reason is because it was the first time I was ever sitting in a class, and I had thought a text had said something. And the teacher got up, this was my first year of Bible college, and he did this exegesis on Romans 7, and he explained what he thought it was saying, which I, to this day, still think it's saying. And it was the first time I went, okay, I thought a whole text was about this. Then, wait a minute, what? And I started a journey where I printed out the whole book of Romans, laid it on my floor like a psychopath.
Love it.
And would take a marker at 2 a.m. by candlelight.
Love it.
And try to chase the argument. I don't know why it was by candlelight. It was like,
no, this is like a form of what they call a manuscript study.
Yeah.
You're getting rid of the chapters.
Yep. Let's go. And I would trace these themes all the way through the book. And I would try to figure out what chapter, and what I was trying to solve was chapter 7. So I read the book of Romans through the filter of 7 almost because of that thing. And my point is, guys, have these moments in your life that shake you and then cause you to go in and study the Bible. That was the first time in my life where I feel like I really went deep and studied the Bible and rethought everything I thought I knew. So that's the fun of the Bible, is to go in and go, oh my goodness. And anyway, all that to say, I think chapter 7 is talking from the non-Christian perspective, and he's especially 14 down, and he's talking about, he's using himself as a representative Israelite, saying this is what it was like under the law, and that's why he never mentions the Spirit. He talks about, I try to do good and evil's right there. With very Adam image, very Israel image. There's layers going down. You can read N.T. Wright's book on this Climax of the Covenant. He goes through all these images and typology of what he thinks is going on. And then right at the end of it, he says, wretched man that I am, who will rescue me from this body of death? And he actually answers it, thanks be to Jesus Christ. So he's kind of, and then in chapter 8, 16 times he uses the Spirit. So it seems the argument would be, he's saying this non-Christian, Jewish, under the law, slavery, this stinks, who will rescue me from this? Now let me tell you about my Christian experience, defined by the Spirit, new life, no condemnation, and that's how it works. But I think you can read it either way, and you did such a brilliant job. If this really is a question you care about, some of you are sleeping right now and have no idea what chapter 7 has to do with anything, and you're like, whatever, I want to go watch a YouTube video about lions right now. You should go watch Curt's sermon on Romans chapter 7. He did a great job. So any comments on that?
First of all, I think you can make a good argument for both cases.
Yeah.
I think you make a great argument, and I'm more persuaded towards your argument since we've been working together than I have been my entire time. I've been familiar with this argument for a long time. The counter argument is the amount of personal pronouns he uses.
Right.
I. Just seems like he's talking about himself, not like some
typological.
Like he's faded back into that.
Right. Yes.
And here's my bottom line conclusion at this point theologically. I don't care.
Right.
I think the point he's trying to make is, without the Spirit, this is impossible.
Yes, 100%. Yeah, 100%.
If it's before conversion or after conversion, without the Spirit, it's not possible.
Yeah.
I also really, what I hear you say that I don't want us to miss is really a beautiful thing. And the guys that first taught me how to study the Bible, this is before I went to a certain seminary class or a Bible class. I'm just good disciple guys. They're like, get your Bible out, Curt, and rewrite it, and leave out the verses, leave out the headings, leave out the paragraphs, leave out the periods, and write the whole thing down, and then cut it up and put it together and see where the themes are. Exactly what you're saying.
Yeah.
I think sometimes those editorial helps that we were given distract us.
Yeah.
And they break the continuity. So like one of the things I love listening to the Bible as well. I listen to the Bible as much as I read the Bible, because I'm imagining the Apostle Paul pacing, and there's a guy writing down there, and he's like, "Oh, I didn't get that. Slow down. Where you? Yeah. Oh, that's good." And you can almost get the flow of it where you do have that exact experience you had, the Berean experience.
Yeah.
Where you go, oh, this is much deeper than I thought.
Yeah.
This is actually clearer than I thought it was on my first reading.
Yes, yeah.
And I see the argument now.
Love it.
Especially with Paul.
On that note, there is now, when you were doing that, there wasn't this as much, but now there's Bibles that really have an aesthetical vantage point where they're like, when you read a novel, like all your Bibles, if you zoom in on this, what book do you read that's organized like this?
Right.
None of them have margins that run down.
Yeah.
When you aesthetically sit and read Dostoevsky or Dan Brown or whatever we're reading these days.
Don't read Dan Brown.
Yeah.
Don't. I mean,
none of it looks like this.
Yeah.
And so there's Bibles now, no chapters, no verses, and they're just a page, and it's just text across one side.
That's great.
And it's beautiful. And especially when you're reading narrative.
Yes.
Especially when you're back in Genesis and you realize you've sat and you've read half of Abraham's story, and there's like themes and there's word, and you're reading it like a novel, though. You're not going, I'm going to stop now because chapter 6 is over. You don't even know where chapter 6 is.
Yes.
You're just in the zone.
Yes.
Anyway, so that's a little help
Which
for the
brings
Bible
us
readers out there.
full back to our original question about does God love Jews? God teaches through narrative. Why did God pick the microcosm of Abraham and his descendants?
Right.
To reveal who he was. Because
Right.
we learn by narrative.
Yes.
We learn, so
100%.
you got to get into the narrative of the story. Quit going, I read my 6 verses today.
Right.
Billy
No.
Graham said 6 verses and 1 psalm, and I'm good.
And good, yeah.
Get in a cup
Don't
of
slam
tea.
Billy Graham, Curt. Are you
he-
slamming Billy Graham right now? Come on.
A little bit.
Okay.
All right, we reached the end.
One
We
last
reached the end.
one
Oh,
last
you got
question.
one more?
I got
Okay.
one last
All right,
question.
let's go.
I did not want to miss this one
All right,
from
let's go.
Debbie in Sioux City, Iowa.
Thanber you, Debbie.
You remember? You know
Yes.
why I'm saying Sioux City, Iowa?
No.
Do you remember?
No.
David Letterman, all the top 10 lists.
Oh, the top-
every time
oh,
he'd
boy,
go.
that's an old school
from
reference.
Sioux City, Iowa.
Yes, he would. You're
That
right.
was my childhood.
Can we get graphics?
Dun dun dun
For the
dun.
top
I can't get
10.
the get the top 10 list going. This is but anyway. Okay.
Here we go,
One
last
last
question.
one. How do I explain why God created the world for His glory? That seems narcissistic. You want to hit that? I have a
Yeah,
I have a thought on that.
I'll give you a short one, and then
Sure.
you give me, because you obviously have something better prepared.
I wrote down
God is not vain. God
Yes.
is not vain. So God doesn't need your glory,
Yes.
glory,
Right,
glory,
right.
glory, glory. Actually, He created us to give Him worship because it is good for us.
Yes.
It aligns us with the truth.
Yes.
So it's just the undenial part of God of going, if you really recognize how magnificent I am and who I am and how we're alike in that I've given you my image and how we're so much different in that I am eternal, I'm uncreated, I am beyond time, space, and matter. If you actually get aligned with that truth, being aligned in the truth is our friend, makes your life make sense.
Yes.
So when God says this is created for you to do that, that's what He means. He's meaning
love it.
any amount of separation or denial about who I am and who you are is not good for you.
Yeah.
So God's not going, oh, please worship me. I need so much worship. He's going, no. Align with the truth. I'm this, you're that.
Yeah.
And once you align with it, then you go, whoa, yes, glory to you in the highest.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, no, I agree with that. I very much similar to what I wanted to talk about. I mean, it's Lewis talking about if you chase joy, you'll ultimately find it. But the reality is, what you got to chase joy after is a cruciform. When you start to worship God, when you start to align the very shape of the way you're designed around Him, you find joy. And anyone chasing down joy when they find it in God will never be denied it. And that's why, to your point, why God tells you, worship me, because this is going to be the best thing for you. It's the best thing for me as God. God is the most God-centered person in the universe. That's why He's constantly like, hey, I want you to glorify me. I want you to praise me. And there's something to that. Like, how good is He that He's actually like recognized that of Himself? But there's a way that life works best. And the way that life works best, based on the way we're designed, is when we orient our life around Him. And so it's not narcissistic on His end, it's for our good. So very much the same point. So, guys, awesome. You want to take us away and talk to them about subscribing
give me 30 seconds
30
on
minutes,
Romans
30
chapter
seconds.
9.
Yes.
Romans chapter 9, what's it about? That's where we're going next.
Oh, Romans chapter 9. Paul now deals with this question of, okay, there's a whole bunch of people, my kinsmen Jews, who haven't become Christians. What does this mean about Israel? What is it? Does God choose people? Does he elect people unto salvation? Does he let us just choose himself? How does all that work? Is God sovereign over all things? Why did Pharaoh harden his heart? Did he harden his own heart? Did God harden his heart? What's going on? All of that and more coming to you in Romans chapter 9.
So look for that Romans chapter 9. We do ask you to subscribe to the YouTube page.
Yes.
If you haven't done it, come on, do it. By the way, Mark is doing a major reorg on our YouTube page. It's going to be a lot more clear, a lot more nice. Look for that to come. But right now, subscribe, like, follow, and please share.
Yes.
This is the Bible study. We study the Bible one book, verse by verse at a time. The more we get God's truth in our life, the more God gets into our life. So like, subscribe, and share. And thank you for tuning in to the special edition of Q&A at the Bible Study.